Hello, I'm Michael Sean, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes.
Hi there. I'm glad we could be together again on this podcast. Looking forward to it. By the way, I'm very fortunate to have my friend Michael Sean with me. He's come by again, and we're glad to see you, Michael. Thanks for dropping in. Hope you can enjoy the show as well.
You know, Roger, I'm glad we have this recorded because I'm going to play it over and over a few times about you saying you're very fortunate about the fact that I'm here because I don't usually get that kind of praise from you.
Well, that's true, but you're serving a valuable purpose right now.
What have you done for me lately? Is that it?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, yes, and hello, everyone. As Roger said, I'm Michael Sean, and it is good to be here with Roger on Roger Dykes Just Sayin. What a great name for a podcast.
Well, we owe that to my public relations group because they're the ones that came up with it.
Those guys are pretty sharp.
They are. Everybody needs to use them that possibly can.
Okay. All right.
That's ATPR, by the way.
Well, yeah. You're right. That's a good group. Roger, let's just kick off right here with something that is pretty out in the open and on a lot of people's mind, and that is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. It is, of course, real. To what extent, the jury seems to still be out, but has the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected most everybody in the world, has it had an impact on your life?
Well, it has not affected me health-wise. I'm perfectly fine. I've stayed in most of the time. They're beginning to let us go out now. I've been out some and eaten out and gone places, but it certainly has affected me and is still affecting me today in the sense that my caregivers, some of them have been, for one reason or another, tied up with aspects of COVID-19, and therefore they haven't been able to come over here. I have one in particular that is in lockdown herself because she's with a client that the client does not want her leaving or going out. Of course, obviously she lives there, but they don't want her out potentially catching the coronavirus. And so she hasn't been able to come over here and do her work with me.
So for us to go on and talk about some other things we're going to talk about today, it is important for the listeners to this podcast to understand that might have a greater impact on Roger than you may realize when he said, well, my caregiver didn't come up, so maybe the laundry didn't get done. Maybe you didn't put on clean socks that day. I mean, you know, you don't start thinking about how many layers deep something like that can actually affect you. A few people understand the extent of your disabilities, and we talk about that in the opening of the show a little bit. But the point here, Roger, the question is, how does that affect you when one of your caregivers is reluctant to show up for one reason or another? What does that mean to you?
Well, it simply means that if I don't have a backup person to fill in for that individual, I will not go to bed that night. I will sit in my wheelchair until the morning.
So, Roger, what you're telling me, if a caregiver doesn't show up, then a lot of things that regular people just think of as normal everyday life, like going to bed or getting up or using the bathroom facilities or maybe getting something to eat or drink, a lot of that stuff goes out the window when a caregiver decides that for one reason or another, they're just not going to be there.
That is exactly right. Everything you've listed is things that I have to have help with and cannot do without help. Now, I can get by and have without eating a meal. That I can get by on less liquid. That's not a problem. But when it comes to the caregiver, the nighttime caregiver who puts me to bed, that caregiver, if they don't come, I don't go to bed.
Safe to say there have been a number of times that you have sat up all night in your wheelchair because you simply didn't have any help.
Well, that's true. I don't want to make it sound like that's a frequent thing. It hasn't happened frequently, but it has happened.
Now, the answer, of course, to this would be for there to be a number that you could call or an immediate person that you could say, hey, can you come over and fill in, which, of course, would require a budget, that there is a financial concern in this that either is or isn't provided or that you get help with. And I guess the point that we're about to get around to making here is that's not there.
Well, the reason that it's not there is because the state of Texas believes that families should be the underlying support group, and therefore a family member can come in and take over, and that is generally true and a good idea on the part of the state. However, there are people like myself, I'm not the only one, who have no family in town. I have no one living here connected to me family-wise. As a result, I do not have the backup system that they assume everybody has.
So it's wrong for them to assume that you have a fallback when in fact, well, let me ask you this. How old are you, Roger?
I'm 67.
So there you are. Your family members have passed on.
Yes.
Around you. All right, Roger, let's talk about, if we can, and we told people on the last podcast we would do this, and so we want to start early enough to where there is time. You have a remarkable story. In fact, you were featured on the Free Range Texan podcast on one of the Free Range Texan Heroes and Heroines file, and you were just a perfect example of living through a heroic incident. And let's go back and talk about the blizzard of 2014, because it ties in to really your point.
Well, it was in December between Christmas and New Year's. It was on a Sunday night. I had a caregiver with me, as was planned, and when she was here and everything was fine, there was word that a blizzard was on its way. We do have them occasionally. So we knew it was coming. We didn't know the severity of it. She was here. The blizzard came that night. When we got up the next morning, when she got me up the next morning, she could not get her car out of my driveway. But a neighbor across the street was willing to help get her out because she had pets at home that needed her care and attention. So the neighbor got her shoveled out. She left. Now, I was expecting, of course, for the rest of my caregiving group to come in the rest of that day. Well, within probably an hour of her leaving, each one of them called in, and each one of them said, without knowing the other had called, each one said they couldn't come in because they were literally snowed in. I did not tell each one of them that I'd gotten the other calls because there was really nothing they could do about it anyway. So immediately, or after about the third call, I realized I'm fixing to spend a number of hours here by myself without any help at all, and wonder how I'm going to get through this. So I began calculating the various things that I needed to do and not do in order to be able to survive. And one of the first things I realized was that I don't want to eat any food because that will require bathrooming that I'm not able to do by myself, and there's not going to be anybody here for at least 24 hours. So I began thinking of all the various projects that I could do at my desk and with all the equipment I have around me, and I began working and putting in the time. Well, of course, it wasn't during the day was bad enough that we get toward night. And, of course, there's still no one here. No one's can get here. It's no one's fault. It's not the fault of any one of these individuals. They literally could not get out of their houses to come help me. I got phone calls. I had one phone call from an individual who asked me, who knew me fairly well, and said, do you have food? And I said, yes. But the problem, of course, was that it's in the freezer, and I can't get it out of the freezer to put it in the microwave to heat it up. But there's no point bringing that up to this individual because they can't get over here and help me either. Another person asked if I had a bottle of plenty of water. And I said, yes, I have plenty of water. Fortunately, the water never stopped running anyway, but they meant bottled water. But, of course, I didn't tell them. But in my particular condition, if I had had bottled water stacked to the ceiling, I wouldn't have been able to get the cap off any bottle there to get to the water. So that is no help.
Because your hands are disabled as well.
Right. And I don't have the coordination it takes, certainly on a sealed bottle, like a bottle of water would be. There would be absolutely no way that I could get into that bottle to get the liquid out of it. So I'm here, I'm putting in time, and I was able to talk to people on the phone. A few people called from out of the area. And nothing was prepared. We did not prepare for this because we never knew it was going to happen. So as time marches on, about 6, went in and did what I could to get prepared for the rest of the day, hoping that maybe the things had cleared out enough out there, because I couldn't even see what was going on out there. But that things had cleared out enough that perhaps somebody would be able to get here. We're going to reach a point of necessity and desperation if somebody doesn't get here soon. So, sure enough, at 8:30, right on schedule, my 8:30 caregiver had managed to get out of her house, get in her car,
wow,
make it over here. Of course, she had no idea what had gone on the night before, except when she walked in, she looked at me and it was obvious. This had not been a typical morning for me, and was quite shocked and surprised when she found out what had happened throughout the night.
Roger, let me ask you a question here, because I know where this ends up. When you say that you are not able to prepare for something like that, what you're also saying is the state does not allow you to prepare for something like that easily, if at all. That being the case, there are those, Roger, that would say, well, it's not the state's fault that you had a blizzard in West Texas. What would you say to those people? Or should we simply remind them that you are not alone? There are other people like you. You are a living human being, thinking, smart, master degreed, and there is no reason for you to suffer through an incident like this and some others that we can talk about down the line. There is no reason for you to have to live through something like that if some slight adjustments and preparations can be made in the way things are done. For instance, in your case, in Austin at the state capitol, that some small decisions can be made to adjust the way they do some things that will allow you to prepare when, like in anybody else's life, things happen. It hits the fan, so to speak. Unlike regular people that can quickly adjust and take care of themselves. You're not into a position to be able to do that. So I wanted to inject this right here before people begin thinking, well, Roger, we were all in a blizzard, you know? We all lived through that here in West Texas, but we are all not in your situation, and there is a system set up for people like you, thankfully, but it doesn't address a lot of really outrageously unfair things that you have to live through over and over. And so, excuse me, because most of the time you're too nice a guy to say that. But I've been watching this deal with you for several years, and that to me seems like the exact real issue that's at the bottom line of all this. Now, so go ahead, Roger.
Well, I think in answer to your question, the problem probably lies in the fact that the people who develop the policies and laws that control the program that I happen to be on have never actually been in a wheelchair. They've never been disabled. They're very kind people. I'm not making light of them at all. I'm very thankful for the program. I don't want to have anyone think that I'm not appreciative of it. The problem being that there are issues that come up that they have not thought through, or they think they have the obvious solution to. And sometimes their obvious solutions are not quite as good in reality as they are on paper. And so things that work really well on paper, in other words, on paper, when we heard the blizzard was coming, I should have called Aunt Susie and Uncle Tom and had them come over and stay with me so they could stay with me through the entire blizzard situation.
But you don't have that fallback.
Exactly. That's the thing. And what they have not, part of what is wrong, this program was developed for younger people. And younger people, meaning children even, and teenagers and young people. Those people who are on the program generally have families still. Years ago, when I lived with my parents before they passed away, we didn't have this problem.
Roger, let me introduce you back to the story that you were telling. In the time that we have left on this podcast, let's go ahead and finish that story.
All right.
And bring the folks along.
Okay. Well, my caregiver arrived at 8:30, saw me in a somewhat disheveled condition, and began to meet the needs that I had that were obviously developing, not the least of which was food and water, and was able to bring me back up to speed. And then by nightfall of the Tuesday night, that would be, everything was okay. In other words, we were able to get traffic through. My caregiver came as planned, and so I only had the one night experience of being in that situation. But it was a very telling situation, also one that took through something I had thought of for years, out of the hypothetical and into the reality.
And it could have been 2 or 3 days or more. I mean, fortunately, in a little more than 24 hours, you were able to get things back on track. You were able to go to the bathroom and so many other things that you don't immediately think about.
I suppose if the blizzard had been such that they couldn't get out, and I would have been left here longer than that, I would have, the only alternative I know at the moment would have been to call EMS and be picked up by an ambulance if they could get here and taken to the hospital. I mean, I don't know what else I could have done because no one could get around and help me.
Before we run out of time here, let me just say, if some adjustments were made, because you have, I know, specific ideas about this, we just don't have time for that in this podcast, but if some adjustments were made in the way they handle people who are capable of handling themselves, mentally and physically need help, and you're the best example I know of that. If some adjustments were made, what could you have done differently if you were reliving the entire scenario?
Well, I think the first thing I would want would be an emergency fund of money available for this kind of situation that would exceed what my normal budget is to cover such an emergency. I do not have there is not an emergency fund. I can set money aside and call it an emergency, but actually it's taking money out of my budget that I need to pay the things that have to be paid. Secondly, allow me to pay someone to be on call for an emergency, just for emergencies. I don't mean to have them here all the time, but for an emergency, I need to be able to have someone out there that would be paid because they're not family. You cannot expect volunteer help from non-family members. And you may not can expect it from family members.
Especially in extreme situations.
Exactly. And had I had that available, I could have called them Sunday afternoon.
Now, before anyone turns their nose up at that, we have lawyers in this country that we keep on call for one reason or another. We have doctors because it is important that they be on call to certain people, and there is a siphon paid to these people, and I could go on. There are many other people, but Roger, all you're suggesting is they literally stand between you and desperate situations, and it would not be unusual for someone like you to not just want but need a standby, a fallback of some type, which might even mean that you keep a stipend for someone in your budget that would be on call when you say, hey, man, I need you and I need you now. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, the main thing initially that has to be changed, though, and that is that my budget is already laid out, and I need every dime I have in the budget to pay for exactly what's covered. And we'll get into that later, too. That's another issue. But
yes, I know.
They may say, well, you've got money in your budget. I'm going, no, I don't. I don't have the excess money needed to cover these kind of emergencies.
And you would be happy to sit down with anyone at any time and draw it out on a napkin and say, now, look, here's what you're saying, and let me show you reality because times have changed.
Right, and I would be happy to do that. And Michael, as far as the sitting down goes, I'm always in that condition.
There's the Roger we all know and love right there. Roger, we are just about out of time for today. The people that listen to this podcast, we want them to begin to learn a little bit about a real live segment of people that live in our society that are in many ways dependent, but we as a culture have decided, hey, let's do what we can to make sure that these people can live not lavishly, but comfortably, so that a lot of their needs get taken care of in a professional manner. And that's a lot of what we consider when we talk to you, Roger.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences and my situation. I have a number of years of experience now, and I feel like there are some things I know something about, not everything by any means, and I don't even know everything there is to know about the various handicaps and what other people may have gone through under the same circumstances. I can only speak to mine, but I think it generalizes over into many others.
It certainly does. Roger Dykes Just Sayin, the name of our podcast, and we thank everyone for listening. Roger, as always, great visiting with you. And in about 3 weeks, we'll have another brand new Roger Dykes Just Sayin up. So everybody subscribe so you get a little heads up when the new Roger Dykes Just Sayin podcast comes out. Thank you, Roger.
Well, thank you, Michael, for dropping by, and thank you, listeners, for being here and being supportive of what we're doing.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.